G'day, MBS here. I've got a set of triple Strombergs here that I'm going to re-kit and put together on a manifold. So what I'm going to show you is just a few little tips and tricks for assembling the carburetors. I'll do just one carby, and whatever I do to this one carburetor you will do to all three of them, and we'll get them assembled onto the manifold, and I'll show you how to synchronize them on the bench, ready to put on the car. And they should be pretty close to spot on synchronization doing them like that, and you won't have to do much mucking around except idle speed and mixture settings once they're on the car and running. So let's get into this one carburetor, and I'll show you a few pointers as we go along assembling them so that you do it correctly. Okay, so what I've done is I've segregated that video of overhauling one carburetor into its own section, and I've removed it from this video just to shorten the video up. Now, if you want to see how to do that one Stromberg and repeat it the 3 times on your triples, just go to my website mbs.id.au and navigate through the website, and I'll show you that in a minute close up. And then you'll be able to get to that video through my website, or you could just search for it on YouTube and find it that way. Okay, it's pretty simple. Once you're on my website, you just go to carburetors, then you go to Stromberg, and then click on the CD Stromberg button. That'll take you to the CD Stromberg section. You'll see a blown up view of the carburetor, and then on here you'll see assembly of a 150 CD Stromberg. Click on that and that'll take you straight to YouTube. Now we need to talk about triple setup and what we do from now. We've got 3 of these to do and setting them up on a manifold, so I'll cover that for you right now. Okay, first thing we've got to do is position the throttle, then we'll position the jet, and then we'll put it onto the manifold. And when all 3 of them are on, we'll set the linkages up so that they're all synchronized. Okay, now you need to make sure that whatever you've done to this carburetor, the single carburetor on its own, that you've duplicated it through the other 2 carburetors. Yeah. Okay, so float levels need to be the same, the jet adjustment needs to be the same, the throttle position needs to be the same. Now I'll cover how I set up the throttle statically on the bench, enough to get it on the car and run it. And the jet adjustment's quite simple. You've got the screwdriver slot in the jet arm. You need to mark that position and remember it exactly, the orientation of that screw. Alright, because we're going to turn this down exactly 1.5 turns, so that when you do the next carby, it'll be 1.5 turns, 1.5 turns. Now the screw may be in a different relationship to the body of each carburetor, so you need to make sure that you get it exactly right, so all the jets are exactly the same distance down. Alright, so let's do those couple of things on this carburetor, and then I'll go ahead, overhaul the other 2, get them on the manifold, and then we'll come back and we'll set them all up. Okay, the throttle shaft position synchronization. Very important when you want to synchronize triple carburetors. So to set it statically, what I do is I back the idle speed screw right off till there's a gap between that screw and the lever arm. I get a thin feeler gauge. The thinnest one I've got is 1.5 thou, and I put it in between the screw and the set stop. What I'll do now is I'll just keep screwing that screw in until I can feel resistance on my feeler gauge. As soon as I feel that resistance, I stop. And that's it. Now it's just how many turns I do this up from there. So I'm going to go exactly 1, 2, exactly. And you can tell that by the orientation of the slot. So where you started is where you finish, but the amount of turns extra that you decide to give it, 1, 1.5, 2, whatever you decide. Okay, that throttle is set. So when I do my next carburetor, I do it exactly the same as this, and then I put it on the manifold, and my carby should be very well synchronized. Okay, the jet, as we saw before, it's the amount of just adjusting that jet down, the exact amount of turns we want. So we're going to go 1.5 down from the top. So there's 1, 1.5. Okay, so that's exactly 1.5 turns. We do that to the other 2 carburetors, we'll be pretty well synchronized. So from there, when we make adjustments on the car, if we have to adjust it in 1/4 because it's too rich, we'll do that for the other 2 carbs. If it's idling too fast, we'll adjust the idle speed screw exactly the same amount of turns on the other two to keep the synchronization equal. But of course, if you've got an airflow meter, you don't need to be so critical as with these adjustments, because you'll use the airflow meter to adjust it in the end anyway. But if you haven't got those sorts of tools, this is the best way to get the closest synchronization that you can get. Okay, we're almost done, but before I get into the synchronization, I just want to point out the linkages on this setup. At the moment, this is the standard setup it came with this very long rods on it, and you can see the angle of this lever arm and the angle of the carburetor lever arm are dissimilar. They're not at the same angle. Preferably, when this is resting at idle and that's resting at idle, you want that lever arm to be in line with that lever arm to give you the best mechanical advantage of the accelerator pedal. In this position here, it's going to take quite a considerable amount of effort to actually get this off idle and revving. So you find a lot of the times you over hit the throttle trying to get them to open, you can't accelerate smoothly. So what I've done is I've cut the rods as short as I can make them, bar from going from cutting it in half and cutting a piece out and joining them back together again. But I'm able to, by shortening that as much as possible, get that to about there. It's not the ideal where I want it. I'd like it to shorten it a bit more, but I'll tell that to the customer, and he might be able to buy a set of shorter rods and we'll be able to get a better mechanical leverage out of that setup, and he won't have so much effort to get it off idle. Now of course this means if you have to adjust your accelerator pedals or rods going to the linkage arm, then that's what you have to do. But this is the most best geometry you can come up with when these two are sitting in line. Okay, setting up your linkages statically. What I've done is I've put one rod on first, and I've allowed myself a little bit of adjustment there so I can actually shorten the rod if I have to. So I've given it about 1 turn adjustment left on that, and I've locked it up. So that's now one carburetor moving. So what we do now is to get the second linkage on. Doesn't matter if you start in the middle or on the end, doesn't really matter. You can see this one doesn't reach. I have to bring the arm down to reach it. So it's already opened up the middle carb. So this is obviously too long. So I need to lengthen that one. So it's just a simple matter of adjusting that rod in the center, and it'll unwind from both the knuckles, and when it gets there it'll slip on neatly. Now to check that we've got the right length still, we'll just touch this one open. Now there's a lot of play in these balls, so really these balls have got a little bit too much play in it, but what I'm looking for is that when this opens, that carburetor opens. Pretty close. At the moment, that carburetor is opening up before this one. Okay. Now that'll also depend on where your linkage is. If the linkage runs all the way up to the center, whether it's pulling from the end here, I'll pull it from the end because that's what this one is. Yep, and I'm opening that carby first. Okay, so I need to make a minor adjustment to that rod. So I'll shorten him just a little bit so it doesn't open up. There we go. Now I've got pretty well much. Both these carbies are opening up at the same time. Maybe a little bit shorter again. No, now the middle one's opening, so we'll lengthen it a bit. Okay, but you can see there's a lot of play taken up in this ball. I'm not sure if you'll see it in the camera, but there's a lot of play in these two balls here. And also the same in this. So it's a bit of a never-ending battle to try and get them synchronized. But what we're aiming for, the end result is we can get them to synchronize at idle. As long as they all come back at idle, and when we're setting at part throttle and we put the airflow meter onto each carburetor, that the flow is equal between all the carburetors even at part throttle. So idle is important, so you get good idle quality in air and fuel distribution amongst your cylinders. And also you want a nice even part throttle. You don't want one carburetor open more than the other, because obviously you're going to get different mixture strength in the two cylinders that are fed by that carburetor. So it's a bit of a play around, get everything working right. So now that we've got two on, I can put that clip on, lock that up, and then we'll test it again, make sure it's working right. Okay, it's the same story for the end carby. We can get this to fit on neatly over the top without the circlip fitted to the ball. We'll see how that reacts. So once again, I'll operate it from the very end. I've got the the middle, all the carby's opening, and that is pretty good. If I'm looking at all three of them there, just I'm jiggling it, they're all just opening up fairly even. So this is going to be pretty good setup. The final adjustment obviously has to be while the engine's running, and that is accomplished by, as I said before, an airflow meter, and we'll adjust it all and make sure it's all good. So I'm going to lock all these up now, and that's the job done. Okay, there you have it. I've pretty well covered everything there is to know about assembling a CD Stromberg, putting it into a triple setup, how to adjust the linkages. This setup now is ready to go on this guy's Torana. He can throw it on, it'll start, it'll run pretty good, I reckon, until he gets it to me, and then I can do the final adjustment with my airflow meter. Now, everything I've shown you, you can see is pretty simple, yeah? It wasn't too difficult to put the carby together. Just a few points that I've highlighted on what to watch out for. So, simple carburetor, as long as you do the right thing. Single carburetor on an engine isn't a problem. You don't have to worry about much there, but when you're dealing with triples or doubles, then you've got to do the same to every carburetor. And I've always stated that before in other video. Alright, so all the jets are now set at the same heights, down 1.5 turns. All the throttle screws are down 1.5 turns, and hopefully that should idle, and it should have a decent mixture for the car to run. And of course, the final step is getting all your linkages synchronized, okay? And because you need to have that absolutely spot on for when you go on part throttle operation. The one last thing I haven't mentioned is the fast idle cam on the choke. Alright, if you're running a triple choke cable, like it'll be one cable coming out into a block and then 3 cables will come off that. You need to make sure that the fast idle for each carburetor is identical. Okay, so on the side of the carburetor there is a fast idle cam that gets pulled up when you pull the choke on. You need to reset all those idle adjustment speeds to be identical, so that it isn't trying to open up one carburetor more than the other, the throttle shaft. Alright, so otherwise you're going to get unbalanced running when it's cold, and on a CD Stromberg, most of the time they don't want to start too well unless you actually pull the choke on. So the choke adjustment and the idle speed of the choke adjustment is pretty important. So that's just the last step that you need to make sure that all your cams are basically positioned very, very close to each other, and that each carburetor is synchronized when you're on the fast idle of the choke. Alright, so that's it folks, so I hope you learned something. Bye for now.